Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute honor to welcome you all to today's event on managing and profiting from geopolitical challenges. In today's interconnected world, geopolitical shifts basically can cause rippling effects, and definitely maritime industry is no exception, and the stakes are even higher, as you're completely aware, where every single decision could actually mean a difference between thriving and probably nearly surviving. So with disruptions becoming, the new normal, understanding these dynamics is no longer optional, and it's definitely vital. So tonight we are privileged to learn how to turn these challenges into opportunities. So now let me ask you all a question, if you have a moment to answer. What makes someone an ideal navigator in these uncertain times? Is it decades of hands-on experience? Or it is their ability to inspire change, maybe in a classroom or in a boardroom? Or is it their passion for shaping the next gen of maritime leaders? So tonight, speaker checks all these boxes and a bit more than what I just mentioned. So allow me to introduce Mr. Punit, our president of the Institute of Chartered and Shipbrokers, title of maritime expertise and a torchbearer for digital transformation, one of my favorite topics to start with. As a founder and director of Maritime Next in Singapore, he's a trailblazer, shaping the future of commercial shipping. He's not just a leader, he's a mentor, investor, an educator, and a visionary. So with over 30 years of experience in dry bulk shipping, holding senior roles in companies like British Shipping, Cloudness, your impact has nothing been short of transformative, Mr. Punit. So, and his knowledge extends far beyond the commercial sphere. As a president of the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers and a fellow at numerous global academic institutions, your voice in geopolitics, especially, and your podcasts, your chat about geopolitics and trade gathers some of the brightest minds in the industry, and I'm a big fan already. Probably a post per week in LinkedIn, you never know. So, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Mr. Punit, who will help us decode the geopolitical puzzle that we all have today and to unlock some of those actionable insights for our businesses. Thank you so much, Mr. Punit, if you could join on stage, please. And we would also like to take this moment to also address our new members, MICS and FICS, honor that we would like to give. So may I please welcome Captain Dusit on stage, please. And another new thing that I learned about you is that you're a badminton champion, and I'm sure one day I need to compete against you. I just missed the tournament last time, so thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
May I please welcome Mr. Sumit Roy as well, please. Thank you so much for joining. Congratulations, Sumit. to be hearing from you, especially decoding the puzzle that I just mentioned. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Thani, for the introduction. I think it was definitely over the top. I hope it's been recorded. But but in general, I think I would say one thing, maybe donning the hat of the president of the ICS first, before I go into the geopolitics, which is a topic which has become one of my most interesting adventures in recent times. As the president of the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers, as I just became the president a few months or a month back, I've realized as I'm starting to visit various locations, I'm being very careful saying its location because I've been just learned from the Canada location, ICS Canada, that they do not refer to themselves as a branch. They say that we are Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers in Canada. And that is a very deep way of looking at the fact that we are a global institute which is located in multiple locations, but all in one seamless thread. And that for me is the mission that we in the presidency of the institute and the senior officers and all the members should undertake. We have lost the idea of basically being one seamless global institute. We have kind of made it branch or siloed in some ways, and we don't need to do that because whenever a member becomes a member of the institute, he becomes a global member. And people tend to kind of forget that, and they seem to be localizing their impact. I will definitely endeavor to globalize the impact of every single member that comes along. The other thing which I can do a pre-announcement, it's like an exclusive scoop for the Middle East location of ICS. As I took over as the president, I presented to the Controlling Council in October, and it has been approved and confirmed by the Controlling Council. We are looking to launch from next month onwards an initiative in the ICS, which is a leadership initiative for the industry as a whole, which will be called Shipping for Good Collective. And the reason for this is very simple. Each one of us actually makes a very positive impact on people's lives. Unfortunately, we don't sell that. We don't market it. We don't talk about it. And while as a company, you can probably see this as a way of doing marketing to the company, if you sell them or market it or present it as a human story of our members, this will have a huge impact. So I'll give you an example of a lady who's a fellow in Rome for the last 20 years, Mary O'Neill. She has been working with the World Food Program. Every single action that she does in her job in World Food Program ensures that food reaches those people who cannot afford food. Aid cargoes in those countries where nobody wants to go, she tirelessly fixes ships, and it's shipping that is basically making the difference in people's lives. We don't highlight it enough. We as an industry don't do that. So we are launching the Shipping for Good Collective next month. So look out for it. But more importantly, think about the jobs that you're doing as members, as fellows of the Institute, and how it eventually directly or indirectly impacts the lives of the people across the globe. And we do actually have that impact. We just need to think a little bit about it. Please share those stories with us in the Institute, and we will make sure that those human stories about creating positive impact, what I call uncommon actions for common good, will come out in the shipping network, in all the media outlets that we can try and push out those stories to. And we want to change the image of shipping and bring it back to the positive image which we have always had for years to come. I'll just end this with a thought to think about from your side. From ancient times, ships have been always revered as the most resilient objects in the world. And I don't mean this lightly. Think about it. Ships sail through very tough times, tough oceans, and they make it to the other side of the destination most of the time. Ships were seen as symbols of resilience, something that goes through times and survives and grows and progresses. Which is why every single positive emotion in human psyche has got a suffix ship. You have partnership, you have friendship, you've got worship, leadership, all these things have ending ship. Why is it ship? Because ship is the best way to depict the kind of resilience that the relationship demonstrates, whether it's leadership, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's worship, or whether it's friendship. We guys have lost that essence of what we are doing today, and the pride with which we do it is missing as an industry. ICS will try and bring that back, not because we are ICS, it's because we are having members who have stories to share, and we will become the conduit to share those stories. So this is a pre-announcement, as I call it, to try and give you guys a preview of what we are trying to do. In the next 2 years as the president, I will be going around the branches and the locations, sorry, I must say locations, and trying to make sure that we weave the Global Institute into one seamless institute going forward. And I hope that all of you will be a part of that journey as I go along. Thank you so much for listening in. Thank you. So let me start by giving you a bit of a background as to what I am talking about from my perspective and where I've landed up today, what has my journey been. I've basically been in dry bulk shipping for more than 30 years. I've worked, as Thani mentioned, with companies like Precious Shipping, Noble Group, Total Cloudness. And essentially today, I have basically moved away from commercial role a year and a half ago and focused on giving back to the industry through Maritime NXT, which is predominantly involved in teaching, training, and mentoring. So essentially, I guest lecture at 8 business schools around the world on geopolitics and shipping. I also do a lot of work for ICS in terms of teaching and also with BIMCO. So obviously, interacting with close to 500 to 700 students a year, I actually feel that it's a great way to connect with the next generation of talent. As you know, I'm the current president of the institute, but I'm also involved in technology because of the fact that I'm an investor in a VC in Singapore, and I sit on the executive board of 4 of the startups, helping these people understand the nuances of shipping industry. And in the same token, I get involved in basically helping the next generation of solutions which are coming up. And I'm very excited to see so many interesting solutions now being developed across the globe in the shipping industry, where we are learning not from just ourselves, but from outside the industry as well. So where did the geopolitics discussion come in? As I left my commercial role, I realized I was already teaching a little bit in my Singapore Management University on the geopolitics, but I had not really focused on that. Today, I started focusing on that much more detailed and deliberately in terms of trying to get that. And for me, the best way to get information is to reach out to the world. This is the QR code for the podcast where you can find all my podcasts. I started a podcast with Sea Trade Maritime a year and a half back when I left my commercial roles. And the reason why is because I want essentially every single one of my students to listen to the views which are current and relevant of the community of the industry leaders. I started with ship owners, I've moved on to cargo owners, I've already covered research companies, broking companies, finance and investment viewpoints, and how shipping and geopolitics interact with each other. I've got technology solution providers like Amber Analytics who have come on board. John Thompson, the co-founder, has actually been an interesting podcast. And of course, recently I interviewed the head of underwriting in Asia at West of Indian P&I Club. And David has shared some amazing insights as to how geopolitics creates challenges for not only just the pricing of risk, but also managing of risk. And finally, I'll be talking to lawyers, and I'll also be talking to people like BIMCO, and understanding how contractual clauses are being drawn up around geopolitics, like the BIMCO Russia oil price cap clause, which has already been revised 3 times, or the new war risk clause, which is on the anvil. So again, I feel that the holistic aspect of these podcasts make it easy, and because I'm a commercial guy, I don't ask them questions like a newscaster would. I ask them very practical questions like I feel in my commercial knowledge. 20-25 minutes max. Very interesting stuff that you must actually listen. You can see it in all the mediums, but you can get it all in one place. So this is the synopsis of why the discussions that I'm going to go through now are going to be predominantly from my own experience, but are not to do with basically these insights that I gathered. And I've done 15 podcasts so far. Every single one of them is a gem. And it's vaulted knowledge of those people forever. They will always be there talking about this, and that's really, really good. Now, I start all my lectures in universities with this particular slide. It's a bit dated, but I can assure you that the things haven't changed as much as you think they would have. This was in year 2000. Every single country in blue had America as its largest supplier, physical supplier, which means that trade was basically predominantly in those areas where, for example, somebody in Brazil or Argentina was predominantly getting his stuff from US, and therefore trade lanes were very clearly marked. It was a time when America was the undisputed global geopolitical leader of the world as well. In 2001, China entered WTO, and they completely changed the dynamics in 18 years' time. In 2018, you had pretty much the whole world becoming red, which doesn't just have a geopolitical implication, it has a trade implication. The guys sitting in Argentina and Brazil are now importing stuff from far away in China, and therefore trade lanes change and trade flows change as well. This is something which was something you could predict, you could talk about, you could see happening in some form or the other, and that's where the strategy of managing geopolitics and risks associated with is very important. This picture hasn't changed dramatically in the last 5 years. It has changed a little bit because some countries are less reliant on China. They've got China plus policy now, but China is still very much in the mix because once you start producing the volume that they do, it's very difficult to try and dislodge that particular producer from the market that easily, right? So of course, this is, by the way, a Financial Times article infographic, which goes to show that people have shown interest in this beyond that, but none of this stuff in the article that I'm talking about talk about shipping in this case. It was all political, it was all economical at the end of the day. In the next 40 minutes or so, I'll be talking about the various impact factors which impact geopolitics and shipping and how they interact with each other. I'll talk a little bit about how trade and geopolitics are intertwined with each other, with giving you examples from the Financial Times and other newspapers about what you read in the newspapers has a direct impact, what I call headline to bottom line implications. You have to take that into account when you do business. And then, of course, there comes the impact factors. I talk about how barriers and free trade agreements are changing trade flows, and they will continue to do so. I talk about critical pathways, and I don't mean just Suez Canal and Panama Canal there. Critical pathways is also pipelines. It's also the northern and Arctic route. All these things are critical pathways at the end of the day. Demographics, one of the most unseen spaces. It's a bit like a kid growing up in front of you. He grows up slowly, so you don't realize it. But if you see somebody kid after 5 years, you suddenly see, oh, you've grown up a lot. Demographics creeps up on you very quickly like that. And that's what you can actually predict sometimes and use that to your advantage. Economic dominance. I'm being a bit diplomatic here because when I teach to Shanghai and Dalian Maritime students, I cannot use the word economic imperialism, which is what I normally would use for China. But economic dominance and what the BRI is doing for the trade flows. Then I look at alliances and new trade flows. How new trade flows develop. Can you see a new trade flow changing and developing? How can you profit from it? We did that in Lavenes. We saw a new trade flow coming in, and we actually had a 5-year contract on a trade flow that did not exist before we started doing business there. And then technologies impact. Again, something that creeps up on you very, very quietly, but everything has a knock-on impact on shipping because shipping impacts everything down the line. Change being constant, I'll give you some interesting examples of how change is actually changing things, people's psyche and mindsets as well. Shipping, not so much, trade, a lot more. And finally, the last part is about the toolkit. Everything has to have a method to do the business. I'm not saying that I'm giving you a toolkit which may be a short success, but it is definitely an ability to manage these risks, which will give you the ability to profit from these risks. And if I can teach you how to fish rather than give you fish to eat, that will make you a lot more self-sufficient in your own business and how you think about decision making and going forward. So that's the aim for what I do. Of course, this is a very small snapshot of the course that I teach, but I'll try and keep most of the essence in it as I go along. Right. So geopolitics has got two different faces, as I call it. The public dimension effectively is something that you see in your newspapers all the time. Maybe this Biden headline will become Trump headline. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. All this is going to continue. Sensationalism is going to be there. People are going to talk about it all the time. Always available, always being discussed. Behind the scenes, there are lots and lots of unseen aspects of geopolitics which people don't talk about. You don't talk about the sourcing choices being impacted by the fact that geopolitical challenges are there, and I'll give you an example in a minute. You don't talk about trade routes changing. Obviously, you're seeing this very public challenge in the Red Sea right now, but there are other trade flows which are changing. There are other trade routes which are changing as well because of the geopolitical changes. Security concerns, hub development. There are certain hubs which are being developed with a clear understanding that the future lies in this area. ASEAN developed like that. That's the whole idea of ASEAN going forward as to how we build that entire region and the prosperity around it. But most importantly, geopolitics is all about memories of what happened in the past. Nobody talks about it, but if you dig a bit deeper into conflicts that are today ailing the world, there is a lot of historical aspects to it. If you read history well, you probably understand the geopolitical aspects quite well. And then once you understand that, you can profit from it as well. Now, this is an example of India talking about expanding their domestic flagships, but look at the reason why they're saying. The development assumes significance, especially since countries withhold flagships when there are disputes between nations, said a senior government official. That is the reason. They are openly saying the idea that basically when I have a bad relationship with somebody and there's a geopolitical tension, the guy doesn't give me business, the guy doesn't give me ships. I'm going to basically build my own ships. This is not an economic decision. Mind you, it's 100% geopolitical discussion which has prompted Indian government to think about this. This is a crazy example, but it's a real example that you see very recent times, right? Now, let's look at trade and geopolitics. There are only three reasons why trade happens. The first is the standard competitive advantage theory we've learned for many, many years, economic benefits. And if it happens because of economic reasons, it's a much more sturdy development and most likely will continue for a while. Strategic takes a little bit less economics, but puts a little bit of geopolitical flavor in it. And geopolitical takes both strategy and economics out of the window and creates a solution or a challenge for the producers or the consumers, because trade is now moving to an area which is neither economic nor strategic. It's a very dicey space, but you need to look out for that. So I'll give you main headlines from Mining Journal, for example. This is a very clear example of economic trade because Metro Mining believes that they are able to essentially build a low-cost operation and supply to China. Nobody else can do that. They have trade advantage and they've decided to do that. There is nothing complicated about it. It's purely a cost-based discussion, and trade is going to develop because of that. Follow the trade, you will see what happens. On the other hand, you have the Saudi Arabian government, which is committed to diversifying the revenue. So their strategy is to diversify, and because of that, they've basically started getting into phosphate. And what a great time to get into phosphate, because Jordan, which is essentially exporting a lot of phosphates to the rest of the Asian countries, is now having a problem because the only outlet it has is Red Sea. And Red Sea is now in serious problems as such. So can Saudi pick up some of the slack and try and replace that? Strategically, this is a huge trade. Will that make economic sense to Saudi Arabia? Maybe or maybe not. But they will still go ahead with it because strategically, they want to diversify revenue. And finally, you have got a very clear understanding where Americans have told this heater maker, Vanguard, saying, unless you come out of China, we stop buying from you. 100% geopolitical shift in trade. Now, this will create container volumes moving from certain countries to another country. Where will this guy set up shop? Is it Vietnam? Is it Cambodia? And where else can he actually go and set up this production facility? But in order to sell American clients, he has to move out of China. This is all in newspapers in front of you, but you need to follow the headlines to your bottom line, as I keep saying at the end of the day. Now, when I look at barriers in free trade, there are two types of barriers in free trade. One is, of course, the financial barriers. You have the penalties or the duties or taxes and tariffs. Of course, tariffs is a very interesting word right now, with Trump talking about tariffs probably every day in the morning, along with breakfast. But at the end of the day, they are still solvable. Why? Because it's a discussion between two parties who actually say, who will pay for this, who is more commercially strong in the negotiations, and eventually something gets resolved at the end of the day. You take some, I take some, that's fine. The problem happens when there are non-financial barriers. Those are the ones where trade actually gets hit. Because if you put a quota, if you put a ban, or if you put a restriction on quantity, then you have a problem. Because then even if you want to negotiate financially, you have no option but to reduce the volume. Those are the ones you need to watch out for. And eventually, if somebody is not going to get X amount of cargo from his original supplier, he still has a demand of X plus Y, that Y is going to come from somewhere else. So you need to follow where that Y will go and why will it go there. So you have to have that understanding at the end of the day, right? So if you look at the tariffs, for example, as I mentioned, as a financial penalty, in Trump administration, the first term, the tariffs simply didn't work. The trade deficit with China has ballooned. The import has continued on. Of course, the Chinese could actually look at alternate sources of goods for some of the cases, like grains. But at the end of the day, the American people have suffered. And I will talk a little about Trump's second term in a later slide. But it's very interesting the tariffs did not work, and nobody talks about it. But what does work in terms of stifling trade is resource nationalism, what I call wolf in sheep's clothing. When you look at countries basically saying, let's look inwards and not outwards, it creates a huge challenge with trade as well. But please understand, business will continue. It's just that the Indonesians may not be able to supply. They will look for alternate sources if it's available, or it's a price bargain which will actually have to be struck at some point of time. But resource nationalization is becoming one of the biggest challenges to trade going forward. But it also throws up opportunities for new players to come in, and that is something that we can watch. In case of the free trade agreements, you can see that the European Union is probably one of the best examples of complete free trade that's actually out there. They have got the maximum number of free trade agreements in the world, but you can see Asia is not far behind. Africa still has a long way to go, and the recent inclusion of African Union into the G20 has actually been a good step. And also, Ethiopia and Egypt are now part of the BRICS Plus alliance. So that obviously has an advantage which Africa should take going forward when it comes to trade. We need to watch that space very closely. But at the end of the day, when these impacts really affect your bottom line, this is what actually happens. So an example would have been the Chinese tariffs basically changing the flow of grains from US to East Coast South America. That's what tariffs did. You had quotas. India still has a quota of steel imports from China. How they figured it out is how much can each company import. The customs records are given, and then obviously you can only do so much import from China. You want more steel, or you want to either produce it locally, or you basically get it from other countries as well. Ban. So US had a ban on export of oil in 2010 when Obama came and lifted the ban. That ban lifting has actually been the reason why, in spite of 3 wars going on around the world, you're still seeing the oil price being quite stable, because America is not a commodity consumer of oil from Saudi. It's a commodity competitor of Saudi Arabia today, and it's able to stabilize the market as such. So that ban lifting has obviously created new trade flows, especially America down to Asia. Subsidies, I remember in my time in Clavinus, you had sugar subsidies, too much production, not enough time or place to store the sugar cane. Rather than let it rot, you simply created subsidies. And suddenly, the Australians were sweating because their sugar was not cost effective when it came to the the Japanese and the Korean and the Chinese markets, because the Indians could actually sell it at a much cheaper rate. A completely new trade flow. We saw sugar cargo from West Coast India, which we never thought we'll ever see. The challenge, of course, was to try and clean those cold ships to load sugar. Not an easy space and that space. And finally, a free trade agreement. When one of the Indian steel majors, and you can guess that by now, bought a company in Singapore, they started using this entire concept of multiple trade flows from a single trade flow. Previously, they used to export directly finished steel products to Vietnam, and that meant that they had to pay duty in Vietnam. India and Singapore had a free trade agreement, and Singapore was a part of ASEAN. So what they started doing, they started exporting raw steel or billets into semi-finished products of steel into Singapore, free trade. And from there, they started exporting steel products to Vietnam after processing them in national steel in Singapore. That meant two trade flows instead of one single trade flow. And also higher tonnage moving into Singapore from India, which was not happening earlier as well. So trade flows are obviously changing all the time. You need to keep an eye on that going forward. Right. Let's come to critical pathways, one of the most interesting topics, which is obviously being everybody's attention going forward. There are three areas of critical pathways that we look at. One is, of course, piracy. Piracy is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge. The Somalis are back in terms of the piracy challenges in East Africa. There are wars, proxy wars, and I include sanctions in that as well. And of course, finally, the climate change. Although Trump believes there is no global warming, but the rest of the world, unfortunately, is facing the consequences of exactly global warming. But it's also opening up trade flows at the same time as well. So, of course, Russian-Ukraine conflict, one of the key challenges, as you see from the UNCTAD projections, that by 2024, this year, they expect that grain trade flows are going to go right through the roof. And that's benefited a lot of companies, a lot of shipping companies as well. This is likely to continue even after Trump decides to basically choke Ukraine and probably get Russia to do a ceasefire with Ukraine, etc., etc. I still believe that there will be no complete lifting of sanctions in my mind. There will always be some challenges which will need to be made that these grain trade flows might continue in some way there. Interesting part is Russia actually had the second largest trade surplus in 2023, in spite of the war. They were still selling stuff left, right, and center. When it came to energy, they actually started selling crude oil to China and India instead of selling it directly to Europeans, and thereby the ton-mile demand has gone through the roof. Hafnia has just basically created a massive profit gravy train, and other tanker companies have followed as well. So this is a huge ton-mile impact which is happening because of this thing. Will the war end it? My question is, if the war does end it, there will be other pockets where Russia will need to continue supplying its partners going forward. But that dynamics can easily change going forward as well. But the bottom line is, trade is flowing and flowing in a different direction than before. Of course, Red Sea attacks is very, very tragic, and you can see that the Suez Canal is losing massive amount of flow, and the Cape of Good Hope is actually benefiting all the time. Unfortunately, the word Bab al-Mandab actually means the gate of tears in Arabic, and that's exactly what it has become, unfortunately, for most of the people transiting through that particular area. But interestingly, I want to point out to this map. Look at the countries like Jordan, Sudan, Eritrea, Yemen as well, Djibouti, Ethiopia. All these countries have got no option but to go outside into the maritime trade via the Red Sea, which means that either they have to go and talk to certain owners who are basically having an unofficial agreement with the Houthis that they will not be bombed, or the ships will not be bombed, or they are stuck with a really problematic situation where they can't really do any trade. Air cargoes are a problem, and other shipping issues are still there. So effectively, other countries have to step up. I showed you that Saudi Arabia is trying to do more phosphates, and that is obviously going to have an impact on the Jordanian exports at some point of time as well. Of course, if this gets resolved, everything can come back to normal, but people are going to be a bit skeptical going forward in general. The piracy is still an issue, and of course, re-emerging threats in Somalia means that those people who might still have an agreement with the Houthis for not attacking their ships could easily face the pirate problem as well. Or ships that otherwise feel that they are safe from the missile attacks might still end up with piracy challenges as well. That is going to divert more ships away from Red Sea, and therefore trade flows will continue to change even going forward. The Northern Arctic route is one of the biggest defining changes that will happen in years to come. Russia has prepared for sanctions to be there every single year on year, increasing as we speak. They don't see any end to this. Whether it's Trump, or whether it is Biden, or whether it is Harris, doesn't really matter to them. Because there is a unilateral way of imposing tariffs on Russia, which has got absolutely no basis sometimes, but that's how they are looking at it. And therefore, the facilitation of sanctioned trades is going to be done essentially through the Northern Arctic route as such. It's of course shorter as well, but especially if you're going to China or you're going to India, northern route makes a lot of sense as well. What is the problem? The problem is it was not open throughout the year. This year, Russia has taken single hull tankers for the first time through Arctic route. This is a Financial Times headline, by the way. This is the first time that I've seen shipping being covered, again in a negative way, in the mainstream media, but they want to keep the route open throughout the year. But more interestingly, they have had two instances where I have actually seen it, where sanctions were imposed on a cargo midway through the voyage. So when it left the Russian port, it was not a sanctioned cargo. Halfway through, it became a sanctioned cargo. Now, can you imagine what happened in this case? They're basically stuck with a situation that the ship is arrested in Singapore as a sanctioned cargo. Here, the northern route will allow them to basically go because it's pretty much entirely Russian territory at the end of the day. They will be committed to keep this open, and they're spending a lot of money on icebreakers, so maybe an investment to do at the end of the day. Another critical pathway is this mountain pipeline expansion in Canada. They used to have 330,000 barrels coming out from Alberta to Vancouver, and Vancouver has a restriction of Aframaxes as the max size of tankers allowed. Most of that 330,000 used to go to America, to Midwest, and effectively, when they created the pipeline expansion and increased the capacity by another 600,000 barrels a day, they basically consciously decided to not involve any American companies in this project. So the entire expansion project is done by Asian companies, and it is meant for Asian business as well. Because they have learned from the first Trump term that sanctions will be imposed. The NAFTA agreement has been renegotiated once, and now it is going to be renegotiated the second time when Trump comes back again. So they are spreading their eggs in the baskets, as they call it, and this has created a dramatic change in trade flows. Something that was basically a quick trip of 15 to 20 days is now a 75-day duration because it's a trans-Pacific Ocean trade, which is a huge advantage for the business at the end of the day. But of course, you have to keep yourself updated with what's going on. Demographics, and I'm going through this quickly because I have a little bit more time. The question that I ask all the time is that what are the key aspects of population growth? Where is the population growth happening? And what kind of pockets of growth are experiencing what kind of consumption patterns? Because please understand that what your children will be consuming as global consumers is very different from what you consumed at their age. Their exposure level is different. Their market access is different. The Nigerian consumers do not need to have a physical marketplace to go and buy something. They buy everything online. They don't need a bank to have an account. They have a Google Pay wallet. Everything is being done online, and their exposure is global now. And of course, the preferences change as go on. I worked in precious shipping in two different states, from 93 to 97, and 2001 to 2002 to 2006. The second time I came, it was a whole different country. They were consuming croissants and bread and all kinds of dairy products without any hesitation. It was a rice-eating country back in the 90s. The exposure of the expat and the global exposure changed the ties to an extent where they're importing 13 million tons of milling wheat every year from America. A trade flow that did not exist when they were a rice-eating nation. But they're making that much bread now because every single coffee shop in Sukhumvit has got basically a croissant and bakeries and all kinds of things going on. So obviously that has a huge impact there. Equally, the population of the country at demographic profile and income level will determine the demand. Just put this in perspective. China, India, Brazil, Russia, South Africa were the original BRICS countries. They've expanded this to 3 more countries in the Middle East, and Ethiopia and Egypt. This is a huge amount of population that's going to actually start consuming things. And I'll come back to Asian middle class in a minute. But that will drive trade. You have to be there to understand what's going on. Please ask questions all the time. Asia is also going to consume more than half of the world's electricity by 2025. You think that they're going to do it all on renewables? Not really. They need a lot of fossil fuels at the end of the day. And you saw in the COP29 situation where a lot of countries in Asia and the developing world, what is called the global south, actually fought for more money to actually subsidize renewables. Why? Because they know that fossil fuels is still the cheapest way to generate the development and the and the production that they really need at the end of the day. Interestingly, these countries are heavy consumers of fossil fuels, but when it comes to per capita consumption, it's the Americans and the other European countries which are way ahead, which means that potential for trade is massive. Because as the prosperity starts coming into the Asian economies, you're going to see a better per capita consumption of fossil fuels, and there is still a lot in that story. And remember, Trump is back, so drill, baby, dig, baby, dig, all that's going to come in whether you like it or not. So I feel that fossil fuels are there to stay for a long period of time. The trade had already started changing. This is way back in 1990s and 2010, 2015. The developing countries within themselves started getting a bigger share of what they did. And once the trade agreements became bigger, you can see how big the RCEP is. RCEP, you can see, is predominantly the countries in Asia, Australia, and China, and they are the ones who are actually driving the change going forward when it comes to trade flows as such. So trade flows are shifting according to demographic trends, whether we like it or not. And this is a process that we continue. Keep an eye on that. Also, my one advice in a recent conference when I talked about this was please invest in Africa. In the Middle East, you guys are very, very close to Africa. Please try and invest in Africa, understand the demand trends there, because by the end of the century, every third person in the world is going to be from Africa. That's not going to be, it's not going to be an interesting space. It's going to be exploding as one of the best markets to be in the next 15 to 20 years time. So Africa is the place where you can actually go. Now I come to economic dominance. Again, remember, this is economic imperialism at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, it's colonization in new form. That's the way I look at it, to be very blunt about it. The colonies basically were formed with maritime and trade in mind. The Britishers and the other colonial powers were basically looking at trade to start with, and they eventually colonized these colonies. And then they started creating a two-way trade flow. What was the two-way trade flow? Raw materials from colonies into these colonial powers, and then finished products going back into the colonies as markets for these finished products. This two-way trade is exactly being replicated by China today. There's no other way to describe it. Today, China is by far the biggest economic superpower in the world. America is an economic superpower because it can print dollars. If it did not have that ability, I very much doubt whether it has the money to pay for its bills. But the BRI was the biggest and the most ambitious project that any country in the world has ever launched. And there is a historical connotation to it, guys. Remember, Chinese civilization was one of the most successful civilizations in the ancient times. They want to recreate that ancient road, and that is why this red road is the Silk Road, which is the old ancient road. The blue is the maritime Silk Road. But interestingly, I've left the original Silk Road or maritime BRI intact, which had Kolkata as one of its points. Unfortunately, India is not a part of that, so they've just decided to shift the other side of the Bay of Bengal and go to Myanmar and pick up something there. They might pick up something in Bangladesh as well if things go right according to what's happening now. But at the end of the day, this is very positive for raw materials. They've already invested $10 trillion. They've got more to invest. By 2050, they will take shape in terms of what they really see the vision happening. So there's still another 25 years left of investing in BRI. They have not done it yet, and this is going to be a huge impact as well. And the reason why China is confident is because they feel that by 2028, they will take over the world's largest economic status from America. And I don't know whether it will happen or not, but the process has already started, even though today there's a little bit of a speed breaker of some sort, but I have a feeling that China will come right back very, very quickly. They are biding their time again at this phase of time. But also remember, with the wealth that they have, trade is integrally a part of it. They have been growing at a good pace compared to the other countries which have been actually struggling, the EU and the US as such. And because of the trade, they have been overtaking all other countries. In 2019, they became one country that has the largest amount of physical presence in the world. This is not a small thing, guys. They have overtaken all other countries and said, I want to basically have my presence felt physically in all different parts of the world. Trading posts, consulates, embassies. All these are essentially trade mechanisms. They actually foster trade. So if you look out for which new places is China going to, start looking out for trade to come out from there, both ways, in and out. And that is something we can look at. This is an amazing infographic about how much money is owed by these countries to China. Guinea out there owes $21.9 billion to China. If a country owes that much of money, and that's close to about 28% of their GDP, you think that they have any economic decision-making powers? So I tell my students and I tell my participants in conferences that if you want to buy Guinean bauxite, please don't go to Guinea, go to Salt Lake City in Singapore because there's a company called Billing Shipping controlling the business at the end of the day. That's what is happening. That is how trade flows are changing, and this is actually going a huge way. Now the Russians are also in there. India has also gone in there, and America also has been investing in some projects in Africa because they've woken up to this idea that China has more or less taken over the entire continent. There are pockets of Africa where renminbi is now an official currency parallel to the local currency. It's that crazy, right? So here are some trade flow examples. Raw materials obviously going into China and finished products going back into the same countries. Exactly the colonial trade flows. If you look at them, you will find them quite interesting. And more of these are coming as new countries are coming on stream in terms of Chinese markets, right? Now let's come to Trump, because I want to include this along with China because everybody talks about the US-China trade war as a big challenge. I genuinely feel that the Americans have actually been very poor in choosing their leaders. Just imagine a country like that not having a choice other than Trump and Biden at one point of time. It just sounds ridiculous. They should be able to come up with better people, honestly. But anyway, they played the Trump card again, as they call it. And the first time around, tariffs did not work. But this time around, there's a big change. Why? Because Trump doesn't have to worry about re-election. He can't stand for re-election now. So now he's basically got 4 years of just doing whatever he wants, because if he creates a mess, somebody else will clean it up. And of course, he is not a politician. He's a businessman. He wants to leave a legacy. In the 4 years, he wants to make sure that he's remembered as the best president in the history of US, and he has done the most deals in the world, which has helped America, at least on paper. Very little regard for historical ties, and he's going to really get fossil fuels above the right. He's going to try and make sure that more LNG, more LPG, more coal gets out of US than ever before. Mark my words, it's going to be a completely different trade flow going forward. Everybody will lose a little because Trump wants something for himself in every deal. But Europe, I think, will lose the most. And the reason why they will lose the most is because of one reason. The trade tariffs did not work the last time. This is from the Harvard Business Review, an article which talks about the fact that whenever they put the tariffs, they did not have a choice to source from any other destination because China was the cheapest anyway, even after tariffs. Obviously, the deficit has gone up. The consumers are paying for more money for the same commodity, and eventually Trump might decide to sign a deal. The fact that he's come with 10% tariffs only for China instead of 60%, which he was threatening, is already seeming like Musk is working in the background to help the Chinese discussion as well. But why would he sign a deal with China or Asia? Because Asia has something to offer that Europe does not offer at all. Asia is basically slated by 2030 to have 65% of the middle class in the world. Just imagine that you actually are looking at the kind of market space that he can offer. Obviously, he wants to see more and more stuff happening. Also, the European alliances are completely in disarray at this point of time because there is internally a big challenge in terms of the economies being lopsided. It's a bit like one tire of tractor and one cycle tire in a car, and it's all very challenging space, especially countries like Italy, Greece, and others are struggling in some ways. But ASEAN and BRICS have actually solidified the global south a lot, and Asia has actually done a lot of good things. And also remember that there's a lot of discussions on climate change. Europe has taken a very hard line on climate change, and Trump believes that climate change is just a figment of imagination. So essentially, he will not see eye to eye on Europe with a lot of discussions. And NATO is another problem as such. This purposely will help shipping, 100%. There will be no long-haul trades, there will be more long ton-mile advantages, and I generally feel that this is going to be a good season for shipping. Trump is good for shipping and good for Asia. That's my feeling as well. Right. Coming to alliances and rise of new trade flows, there's a lot to digest here, guys, and I'm going quite fast, but I don't have choice on this one. Why do new trade flows happen? Either demand changes happen because new consumers spring up and say, we want this commodity, please give us. Or you have supply changes because suddenly, like a new iron ore mine that's coming up in Africa, everybody's following that at this point in time. Obviously, that's going to create new changes. Shifting center of gravity. As countries become more independent, geopolitically strong, they actually start dictating terms, which is actually an example that I will quote just later after this. Strategic decisions, exactly the Saudi discussion that we talked about, that creates a new trade flow, or they just force because of challenges that they face around in the market, they're just market takers, and then they decide new trade flows happen because of that. These are the 5 reasons trade flows happen. You have to look and align yourself with that as well. One of the other reasons why you actually have trade flows changing is because of onshoring, nearshoring, and outshoring. And onshoring is something which is actually Trump's vision, but I think he will be more or less content with nearshoring at the end of the day. I think realistically he will not be able to bring everything onshore, but definitely offshoring will suffer. And that may have an impact on trade flows, especially from Mexico and others. But remember, he has now put tariffs on Mexico and Canada, or at least plans to bring it by January. That's not good news. That's not good news for nearshoring at all. Then what's the point of actually setting up something in Mexico? By the way, 65% of the new investment last year in Mexico was fronted by Chinese companies. So you're not going to get China out of the picture that easily, even though you think you're actually importing from Mexico. But China is losing ground. As I said, people are looking at China plus one policy. So there are some major industries where they're changing the trade flows. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's not moving massively differently, because a lot of these areas are being captured by countries like Vietnam and ASEAN, where the trade flow changes are minimal. But sometimes if you go all the way to Latin America, obviously this has a huge impact on the trade flows as well. And of course, this is the example I was talking about with new trade flows, right? So the Qataris were actually having a joint venture with Yara in Norway for many, many years. And they came to us and said, we are dissolving this joint venture. So we asked them, why are you doing it? They said, we guys want to sell to markets that Yara doesn't want to sell, because they connect the closest source to the closest destination. So they say Qatar urea is best for Asian markets, so we don't want to sell to US markets, which are lucrative for us. So they dissolved the joint venture for multiple reasons, but I also believe geopolitics had a say in that discussion. And they set up their own marketing arm in India. And then we did a contract with them for the first time doing urea from Qatar to US Gulf. It's a market that was never there. We saw that, and we actually come back and think about it. It was very much about Qataris building a geopolitical strategic statement that Muntajat will sell to a market that otherwise we were not allowed to sell. So there was an ego clash there. It was a geopolitical discussion as well. And Qatar, of course, is playing a huge part in the global trade as we speak now. And of course, we come to BRICS. These are just some figures for you guys to digest as to what the BRICS Plus is talking about. In 2023, the BRICS group alone accounted for 30% of world GDP and 46% of its population. And recent enlargement is obviously making it 34.5% of world GDP in PPP. And now, of course, you have massive figures of oil production, gas production, and the import of grains as well. So when you control this much of the market, and you have a forum that can talk to each other on a regular basis, that creates a collective bargaining power which is unheard of in my mind in recent times. This is going to have an impact whether you like it or not. Remember, India, China, Africa on the same table, no other forum has that. No other forum has that. And of course, de-dollarization is going to happen only when two people are involved in trying to do a deal and both don't need dollars. Russia and Iran are basically in that space now. So obviously they can't do it in dollars. They are going to have their own. They're talking about their own currency. Will the currency come back? I'm still not sure about that. But de-dollarization is happening within the BRICS already as I speak going forward, right? So that's something to watch out for in terms of trade that will otherwise not happen. The last impact point is technology's impact. And I'll give you a very interesting case study that I did. This is a SLED discussion, which means that technology develops very much under covers. When it is open for public domain, suddenly you see a trade flow come up. In this case, we have Spooderman, which was a mineral in Australia for many, many years. Nobody did it, nobody used it. Suddenly it was used for producing lithium batteries, and now you have millions of tons of Pudumin moving from Australia to China, and it's a huge trade now. But it is not possible unless the electric vehicle demand in China is picking up like crazy, and that is why the lithium battery demand is also picked up. This is the original proprietary study that I did when I was with this bulk with IIM Udaipur. For 6 months, we had 4 MBA graduates with us. We looked at the impact of meat substitutes on meat demand. What are the factors which are driving this going forward? So demographics, taste of the meat substitute versus the meat taste, the price of it, the health conscious behavior, sustainability, and availability of the meat substitutes is all becoming better and better. Also, food security geopolitically is a big discussion now worldwide, so that's going to have an impact on people trying to switch towards meat substitute. But the taste is something very interesting where technology comes in. They are introducing beetroot juice into the meat substitute patty to create the tenderness and the juiciness of the meat patty. And that's all being DNAs, and as we speak, it's pretty interesting technology that people are looking at. Now, 77% of soya in the world is traded for feeding the animals, and 20% of wheat and 40% of coarse grains is globally traded as animal feed. This has a huge impact if meat becomes meat substitutes. And what does that mean? We looked at the trends today going forward from Clarkson's research, and we found out that there's a clear curve as the population increases, no substitution for meat substitutes. It's going to be a clear 534 million tons by 2030 in terms of grain trade. If there's a 5% change from meat to meat substitute, that will have an impact of 27 million tons of wheat being displaced or grain being displaced by 2030. 27 million tons. And if it's 10% displacement, it's exactly double, 54 million tons of grain being displaced. Now just imagine what we are talking about here. If a company's strategy is predominantly to do grain trades in East or South America, this has a massive impact on what is happening in China. So don't look at what Brazil and Argentina are doing. Look at what China is doing and what it's feeding its pigs and cows. That is your marker or indicator for trade flow changes going forward. Obviously, this has a huge impact in terms of what it is. Just a quick slide on changes in constant. COVID-19 showed that you can create trade flows from non-economic aspects as well. When you give aid cargoes, when you give vaccines, when you give other benefits to countries, you have a trade discussion also having an impact there. And climate change is a big discussion which is happening and should be a game changer going forward. So keep in mind that these factors will need to be kept in mind. Also, most countries do not need to have the traditional means of development anymore. They don't need physical infrastructure, they don't need banks, they don't need telephone poles. Everything is possible now on your mobile, and your world is your oyster, as they call it, right? So remember, that's a very this is the crux of the discussion. Take away something that you can take with you and hopefully use in your day job as you go along. So the first thing is, when you connect the headline to bottom line, you've got 5 things that you need to remember. First is knowledge, understand the business and the geopolitics behind it, data analytics, and I'll give you examples of that, technology and how to use it, contractual clarity, and finally, taking calculated risk, because without risk, there's no reward. Please understand that. Now, knowledge is in 2 parts. First is you need to understand customers. Who are your customers? Secondly, what kind of products are they using? And what use do they put the end product to? You may be having a customer who's buying iron ore, but at the end of the day, he's affected by steel prices and steel products. So you don't look at the steel market, you're not going to be able to figure out where your next iron ore cargo is going to come from. Who are the major producers and consumers? Historical biases. Certain countries will not buy from each other because they have historically got very bad ties with each other. They've got a bad history, and therefore, even though they may be able to do the best deal, they might not be able to get any value out of this. And of course, what is the current geopolitical risks existing in the trade that you already have? Critical pathways issues or whatever. That's knowledge. I used to give a very simple example to my team in Clavness. Whenever there was a headline, which used to say that there is a 10 million ton steel plant coming up. I used to give them this, something you can find on Google, by the way. I used to give them this cheat sheet. So producing a ton of steel, you need 1.6 tons of iron ore and 0.8 tons of coking coal. I used to tell them, calculate how many tons of coking coal is required for producing the 10 million tons and how much iron ore is going to be required. Is the country having enough iron ore of its own? Will it do its own? Like India has its own iron ore, but it doesn't have coking coal. So where will it actually import from? So you can build scenarios once you have knowledge. The first part is always knowledge. Only then you start getting into technology part of it. Similarly, there is an equation for producing 1 megawatt of power. When you see new power plants being announced, you can always talk about how much coal will be imported and where will the coal come from, and you can look at that. When it comes to data analytics, I give you this example in Fukushima disaster. When the Fukushima disaster happened, the nuclear part, which is the light yellow part, reduced massively after the disaster, and therefore you found that the oil and gas and coal started creating most of the gap that was being left by the nuclear shutting down. The beauty is you can go back in time and check every single shipment that came in. Where did it come from? Which coal mine? Which gas field? Which owner? Which charter? You can get more data and information to build scenarios for the future if at all another problem like this happens in Japan. Building on past experiences to create future scenarios is the only way to analyze data and take actions against it. This is a very critical part of taking risks going forward. And of course, technology can be used to the maximum extent. Gone are the days when you said, oh, my ship has left the port and you never really knew about it till the time you reach the next port. Now you actually can track that ship like you can track an Uber. You can pretty much get all the information about what's going on. I interviewed Ambre Analytics in one of my podcasts, and they actually have a insurance service now where their insured vessels for piracy risks actually get an alert every time a missile attack happens in the Houthi Red Sea area, saying this is attack has happened 1 minute back. Please hold back your positions. Don't go now because it looks like a crazy situation, or go with a convoy or wait for a convoy. That has saved so many lives. That has saved so much property. That's real-time technology being used. And listen to that podcast. John has been pretty amazing in terms of sharing this idea that eventually he wants to build a insurance product, which is like basically buying travel insurance by buying an airline ticket. You just buy it as you go along when you do your voyage. There are digital tools to manage geopolitical risks. McKinsey Global Institute has a free Global Trade Explorer. Do look at it. It's very useful. There's a company called Flutter Labs in UK, which is a startup that I've been advising earlier. And they have created a mapping of relationships between 176 countries using 16 different parameters. And they introduce variables about Russia-Ukraine war or the Houthi conflict. And they create AI/ML models about which country will fall into which category of camps as such, and whether you have risks or due diligence challenges with that. And of course, my previous company, Clavinus, has got another product called Market Manager, and they are now selling that in the market, which is interesting because it is a great way to understand trade flows, and that's something which is also quite useful from that perspective. So there are digital tools available. I'm sure there are other ones also available going forward. And another way to look at digital solution is I've discussed just now with Ravi and Vikas here about what Lauritsen did, and they mentioned this in one of my podcasts. Listen to it. It's William Edward, the head of research at Lauritsen, who gave me this idea that they actually were struggling with information about production recovery in China during COVID. They wanted to take a long position in the market. They didn't have data. They didn't have information. They brainstormed and they went to a body called National Earthquake Information Center in US. And they bought high-frequency seismic data for China from the National Earthquake Information Center. Then they started mapping polygons using Google Earth of all the steam and power plant access points in China. And then they started measuring the earth movements, seismic movements. That when empty trucks moved, there was less movement. Heavy trucks moved, there was greater movement of earth. And then no movement if no truck is there. And they created a pattern of truck movements, and they basically went and bought derivatives and made $3 million. This is out of the box thinking. So unless you really think out of the box, you can't really come out of these challenges as well. BIMCO and other organizations like GAFTA all have standard boilerplate clauses. Please update clauses every single time. There are clauses being changed and updated all the time. If you don't have a mechanism, set up alerts, try and make sure that you have the latest clauses. Otherwise, you will suffer because you have an outdated clause and the geopolitical challenges will move anyway. So that's very important. And finally, when you take risks, you must try and create strategies which are short and long, medium and long term. So one of the strategies that I actually find is this model building. I build scenarios and I do strategy sessions for companies as well. I've done it for some companies in Greece recently, and I'm doing it for some Singapore companies, where I'm doing half-a-day workshops and commercial strategy sessions around geopolitics. I build models for them and help them create risk models on basis of the information that's publicly available. In the medium term, I also told them to go and open up a rep office. For example, in Africa, if you feel that it's worth investing now, just go and open up a small establishment. And finally, long term, you should try and look at joint ventures and asset building in certain areas where you see value coming up as well. So that's something that is a great way to kind of strategize going forward. I'll leave you with 2 slides in the end. This is from UMass Dartmouth, which actually very clearly highlights and nicely highlights the decision-making process that you normally go through. The first, you identify the problem and the reason why you need to take the decision. Second, you gather information, identify alternatives, weigh the evidence, and choose among alternatives. Then you take action and you review your decision at the end of the day. What this means is, the first step requires awareness. You need to know what the problem is in the first place. That's where the knowledge comes in. The second to the fifth step requires assessment. And the last 2 steps require action. So the 3A approach is something which is very important for companies to take on board. They all require data, they require technology, and they require a mindset change and transformation of the company. So work towards this if you want to manage your geopolitical risks. And I'll leave you with one Chinese slide here, which I really enjoy talking about. In the Chinese philosophy, crises often lead to opportunities. So the Chinese word for crisis itself is Wei Ji. Wei means danger and Ji means opportunity. If a country like China sees opportunity in every single danger, this is the reason why they are doing what they're doing today. It's inbuilt in their culture, and I think every single one of us can at least take away and learn this from the Chinese, that a Wei Ji is not just about danger, it's also about opportunities, and we need to capitalize on that going forward. So that's basically it, guys. Thank you very much for listening in.
Thank you so much, Punit. I really wanted to reflect a lot, but I'm going to book an appointment later on, I'm sure, because we all love Chinese. We all love so many things about China, but I was just looking at one of your slides, and I thought, let me rephrase the slide title to say, Trade and Triumph Without Trump. I think that would suit better. But then, what I also enjoy really is you created a lot of curiosity, especially the subject of geopolitics, which is considered definitely complex by most of us. But I take 3 things back home, though I will still have a hangover for the next 2 days about geopolitics. Headline to bottom line, I think that theory works very well, irrespective of whether we are looking at geopolitics or not. So that's something that I take back home and say, be it any complex topic that I deal with, I do look at headline to bottom line. And memories of what happened in the past, which is basically an unseen dimension. And again, I would relate that not just to geopolitics, but to any new topic that I either teach myself or our students here within the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers. And of course, if you have any further questions, I'm so happy that I give her a Punit, right? And that's why you helped a lot. So I'm sure I don't want to take much of your time, but any questions from anybody?
Yeah, please
go for a round or 2.
And do come back to me with any comments, please.
I have one question about alternative to Panama Canal.
Yes.
Last week, Nicaragua asked Chinese to come and investigate 450-kilometer alternative to Panama Canal. What implications, shipping, trade?
So Panama Canal is very interestingly, Panama Canal was not really with Panama till the 1990s. The Americans actually controlled that canal till the 1990s, and we really don't remember that part. But they have only taken the Panama Canal after the 1990s, and that means that they have still got a long way to go to recover the kind of value that they want to try, especially the new Panama Canal. They have been inefficient, but they've also been unlucky at the end of the day because of the water levels and other things going forward. So I still believe that if you can look for an alternative to Panama Canal, you would have two things to consider in my mind. The first is the cost itself, which means that people will have to upfront, somebody will have to upfront take that thing and say, okay, I'm willing to put that money, which effectively I believe is going to be another wolf in the sheep's clothing of China taking over that particular canal that they built, like they've taken the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. So I think that China is willing to probably look at that, but not right now, because they don't have the appetite to lend that kind of money at this stage. They are also very jittery about Trump coming back because their majority of the treasury holdings are dependent on how Trump takes the American economy forward. So they have a lot at stake there. So I don't think they have the appetite for really funding a canal like that. What can they do then? They will then ask for the countries to then basically go ahead and fund that particular canal and see what value they need to bring in. I don't think the South American countries have that. You talk about similarly very, very small project compared to that canal project is the Kra Canal in Thailand. And it's been going on for such a long time. They've just not been able to find the funds, the value in trying to bypass the Malacca Straits at the end of the day. So I really don't see currently an appetite for that. China has just invested heavily into a port in Peru, which is actually just being opened, and obviously it will have huge implications in terms of bypassing trade from Americas into China directly from Peru and helping the South American countries. So I would say it's a good idea to have. It's similar to the discussion that the Indians and the Americans had during the G20 about the Indian Middle East Economic Europe Corridor, which is a land, rail, and sea corridor bypassing the Suez Canal. There again, the infrastructure is in place in some ways, but now Israel conflict is actually creating the problem. But in general, I think that these ideas will keep bouncing, but you need to have a certain critical mass, and I don't think that China is able to sustain that at this point in time. If India and China combine forces, maybe, but I don't really see that happening, even though BRICS is a good place for them to sit and have a chat. I don't see that happening in near term. We don't have an option to go outside Panama Canal. But, mind you, the Canadians have been smart about this because they have now bypassed the Panama Canal for another 600,000 barrels a day, where they take it via the new pipeline expansion and go straight to Vancouver, bypassing the canal completely. Otherwise, they would have to take via the East Coast Canada into the Asian markets, and they have bypassed it. So pipelines on oil and others, I think, are cheaper to build, but canals are expensive to build. So I don't see that coming. Yeah, that's my view. Thank you. Please.
Talking of canals and possibility that war on also be thinking about Israel bypassing the Suez.
Yes. Again, as I said, I think the India Middle East Europe corridor, the one that they're talking about, is basically a multimodal transport corridor. But if they want to build a canal specifically, they will have to go right through what I call the hot zone at the moment. And I think that when the Chinese negotiated a settlement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, an agreement, I was hopeful that this will actually prompt this discussion of alternate Suez Canal discussion. But today, I think it's very, very difficult because, believe it or not, when this conflict does come to an end in the Red Sea, the Suez Canal will slash its tolls massively. That's my prediction. Because they're losing so much revenue right now, they're going to try and get as many people back as quickly as possible to get back. I mean, this is basically a 75% reduction in tolls over the last year. They have a lot of ground to cover up. So Suez Canal will remain open and become cheaper to go by, in my mind, once the conflict is over. Until that point in time, it's going to be difficult in my mind. Yes. And not just ships that are passing through the Suez Canal for Asia-Europe trade or Europe-Asia trade, but a lot of transshipment is happening from land into Greece and other countries, which is going through Mediterranean into the Suez Canal, has also got pent-up demand. So I see a lot actually going on. But also remember, in shipping, there are wildcard factors like the EU ETS and fuel EU maritime. people tell me that, oh, EU ETS is a European problem. I said, you are going to face using wherever you will be in the world if you go into Europe. And that, I think people have not really understood this yet. So I think there are hidden benefits of having another canal as a competition to Suez, but it's an expensive space for building a canal in this day and age, unless somebody decides to really come as a consortium of countries. Remember, the Suez Canal also did not happen on its own. It was a consortium of countries who came and built the original canal. Even at that point of time, going on your own was very difficult to do that business. Right. Interesting questions. I'm sure that you guys will probably think about this. By the way, this presentation is public. It's doesn't have any proprietary discussion. Maybe the global food meat substitute discussion is proprietary, but I'm happy to share all the slides. So ICS at least must share it with all the participants. Very happy to answer questions. I'm on LinkedIn, very active. I talk about developments in geopolitical space and how it impacts day-to-day businesses. So please do follow me on LinkedIn as well. And do come and reach out to me at any point of time if you need any help, any queries, any suggestions. Most happy to hear that.
Thank you so much, Punit. And I must say another analogy, if I may. Typically, when I speak to vessel operators and chartering teams, they say, oh, there's a cost of shipping of doing a specific job. But I would rather put it differently. That typically a speaker would deliver probably 40 to 50 facts if he's speaking for an hour, and I'm sure you've exceeded a normal speaker, which means we profited from shifting to different, from slide to slide, or rather from topics to topics. So thank you so much for that, Punit. So may I now invite our ICS Global Vice Chairman and our Middle East Chairman as well on stage. Please go on our speaker today. Thank you so much. And may I also invite our committee, ICS speaking somebody on stage as well, please.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much. This was very, very good. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Generally, he's part of the
Yes,
global
come,
commission
come.
committee.
We have. Thank you so much.
Make a quick announcement, which is this part of the press, that our favorite Middle East branch of the Middle East location chairman, Ali Thani, has been elected to the Global Executive Council of the Institute of Chartered Shipbrokers. Congratulations, Ali. This is unanimous decision by the Controlling Council. So rather than that, tomorrow is going to get to the first meeting. Thank you.
I request Mr. Krishnan to stay on stage, please. So we've got our Understanding Shipping Cohort 3 certification ceremony right now. So let's take this moment to celebrate the accomplishments of our Understanding Shipping program students. So completing this program is definitely a testament to all your dedication here. And I must say, we've actually onboarded 100 plus students in the last 1 year. And I think it's a massive credit to the entire team because we started involving not just shipping experts who are deep into operations and chartering, but we also realized there's quite a lot of other departments within our customer company, right? Be it sales, be it marketing, and they would want to understand a bit more. We've got quite a lot of legal advisors joining this program as well. So may I please invite Mr. Krishnan on stage to give away certificates to Ashley, please, if I can ask you to join us on stage. Arman. Thank you so much, Arman, and I'm sure this is going to help you sign up for diploma and PQE and whatnot. Thank you so much. Congratulations. And may I please invite Lalbrook on stage, please. And thanks for all these discussions, Lalbrook, and all the questions. Definitely showing a lot of curiosity, and I must also thank Krishnan for being a main tutor here and inspiring all of us and inspiring me as well to be a co-tutor sometimes. Congratulations, London. May I please call upon Leland on stage, please? So we've already commenced cohort 4, which is up and running right now. Congratulations, Leland. And may I please call Mohammed Ali on stage, please? And the best part is close to 20 to 30% of our candidates have already enrolled to advanced diploma and they've seen specific specialization that interest them, and that's the best part. May I please invite Mahesh Pradhan? Okay, may I please call upon Zoe on stage? Thank you so much. And I'm sure all of you have got the flyers on your table. Please feel free to go through and share this with your colleagues as well if this fits interest. And may I now invite Punit and Krishnan Ali to join us on stage along with our understanding shipping graduates. If I can please invite you on stage for a quick photo. Thank you so much. Yes, everybody. Yeah, thank you so much. Please. Yeah, there.
Thank you.
So congratulations, Ali, for being elected as ESCO and member of the EXCO. And thank you so much for inspiring all of us. May I please ask you to address our audience?
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming here today. As you guys are aware, for the last 8 years, I'm a man of the mic. I really love being here. Today is a special day. The ICS President, Punit, is here in attendance and also in contribution. Thank you very much. I must say the view is always great from up here. I can see all of you together. Today is almost 3 days away, the midway point of this term. I was elected 18 months ago to be the chairman of the branch, and we're just there. In 3 days, we'll be halfway point. And it's been a really great journey to be here for myself and for ICS Middle East. When you look at education, our numbers are up, our pass rates are up. When you look at membership, there are new members coming in all the time, and there's lots of members who are re-elected coming back into our fold. We have these events every month, roughly, where we have such amazing knowledge sharing, big network, high number of attendance, and a diverse audience. In fact, every time I meet somebody new, every time, it's great. The sponsors, and I met all of them, they tell us how much we're contributing value into this industry. They're happy to commit year on year. Our subcommittees, our hiking committee, fitness committee, Sri Kumar Menon, I don't know if he's here. Fantastic job last Sunday. He went for a hike. Our next hike is on, I think, December 15th, the Sunday around that time. So welcome to join us. Most likely a Rabi Trail. Information will be shared. Our understanding shipping program, which we launched this year, already 100 plus in the program. We're running cohort 4 now, and cohort 5 is me. So we're starting to plan for it. Our professional development team is doing really well with the amount of corporate trainings we're doing, and the master classes and others. Having this shipping community was one of the visions I had and our committee had when we started. And I can now see the role the ICS has to play in building this community and keeping it going. At this midway point, I want to share with you something really special. From amongst all the things, would you like to know what I really enjoy the most? I enjoy, and I hope this encourages everybody to take my role and be in the team. I really enjoy working with my team. My amazing team of the committee we have, Ravi Shankar, Vivek, Sudhita Dwivedi, Zareed Rani, Dinesh Lobo, and Temperature. I love the admin team we've got with Ash and Alisha. The subcommittee we have with Janani and Sri Kumar and Krishna. And all the volunteers make everything happen all the time. I really enjoy working with them. And this has been one of the great things. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming today. I'll hand over back to Janani. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Naveen. And I would like to also take this moment to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our sponsors for their invaluable support and making every single event possible and impactful. So thank you all for joining today, and please feel free to proceed to dinner and let you all enjoy it. Thank you so much.